Hayley Mills, why she threw away everything at exactly 20 years old. In 1961, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences gave a special award to a 14-year-old girl. They called it the Juvenile Oscar, a category created for young performers whose work could not be fairly measured against adult competition. Shirley Temple had received one. Mickey Rooney had received one. Judy Garland had received one. Then this particular girl accepted hers. Blonde hair, white gloves, a smile that seemed genuinely surprised to be there. And the Academy retired the category permanently. No one has received a Juvenile Oscar since. No one ever will. You might wonder why they closed the category after her. The answer is not what you'd expect, and we'll get to it. But first, consider this. 47 years after that night at the Academy, in April of 2008, the same woman received a very different piece of paper. Not an award, a diagnosis: breast cancer. She began chemotherapy. After 3 sessions, she stopped and chose her treatment against the advice of her doctors. She survived. Most people who know the name Hayley Mills know the Disney version, the Pollyanna smile, the twin sisters in The Parent Trap, the wholesome, bright, completely unthreatening girl that Walt Disney built into one of the most recognizable faces of early 1960s cinema. They don't know the other version. In this story, you're going to hear about a decision Hayley Mills made at 19 years old, a decision that made her father collapse onto the floor of an airport, that cost her nearly everything she had saved, that scandalized a country, and that she has never, not once, called a mistake. Who she was, and who they needed her to be. Hayley Catherine Rose Vivian Mills was born on the 18th of April, 1946, in Marylebone, London. Her father was Sir John Mills, one of the actors who defined British cinema across 4 decades, known for films like Great Expectations and Ryan's Daughter, knighted for his contribution to the arts. Her mother was Mary Hayley Bell, a playwright and novelist. Talent in the Mills household was not unusual. It was simply the atmosphere. What is unusual is how Hayley got into the business. In 1959, director J. Lee Thompson was developing a British thriller called Tiger Bay. He needed a child actor. He was looking for a boy. He auditioned boys for weeks and could not find what he needed. Hayley Mills was 12 years old and happened to be available, and Thompson watched her read for the role and changed his plan on the spot. He cast her instead. Tiger Bay became one of the most praised British films of 1959. Hayley Mills received the BAFTA Most Promising Newcomer Award. She had been in front of a professional camera for less than a year. Producer Bill Anderson sent the film to Walt Disney with a single recommendation: watch this girl. Disney watched, and Disney moved quickly when he saw something he wanted. In 1960, Hayley Mills was cast as the lead in Pollyanna, a major production, substantial budget, considerable expectations. She was 13 years old and had been acting professionally for less than 12 months. The film succeeded commercially and critically. The Academy decided to honor the performance, but found themselves with a problem. Standard competitive categories required a minimum age, so they created something special: a Juvenile Oscar, awarded specifically for this performance, for this girl. And then they closed the category forever. Here is why that matters. It was not simply that Hayley Mills was talented. Many child actors are talented. The Academy retired the Juvenile Oscar because the standard it represented, a performance so complete, so unaffected, so genuinely beyond what you can reasonably expect from a child, was a standard they did not want to keep measuring against. The ceiling had been touched. They removed the ceiling rather than watch everyone fall short of it. She was 13 years old, and she had already done something that would never be repeated. The question nobody asked at the time was, what happens inside a person who has reached the top before they've had the chance to figure out who they are? The machine. To understand what came next, you need to understand what Disney Studios was in 1960. It was not simply a film studio, it was a brand manufacturing system of extraordinary precision. Disney did not hire child actors the way other studios hired child actors. It identified specific qualities: warmth, innocence, brightness, a particular kind of uncomplicated energy, and it built those qualities into a repeatable product. The contracts reflected this. Disney's standard agreements for young performers in that era controlled not just what films you made, but how you were photographed in public, how your name was used in merchandise and press, and what your public persona was permitted to suggest. The image was the asset. Protecting the image was the priority. Between 1960 and 1966, Hayley Mills made 6 films for Disney. Pollyanna, The Parent Trap, which reached the American top 10 at the box office, Whistle Down the Wind, which earned her a BAFTA nomination for Best British Actress, In Search of the Castaways, Summer Magic, The Moon Spinners. 6 films, 6 years. The same careful construction in every one: innocent, warm, safe. The girl you could take your entire family to see without a moment's hesitation. The films were successful. The public loved her. And inside all of that love, a real girl was growing up, with her own complexity, her own doubts, her own artistic instincts, and finding with increasing clarity that there was not much room for any of it. In 1962, Stanley Kubrick, the director behind Spartacus, the man who would go on to make 2001, A Space Odyssey, A Clockwork Orange, and The Shining, was adapting Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita for the screen. He wanted Hayley Mills for the lead. Disney said no. Her father said no. She was not asked. Lolita was released in 1962. It became one of the most discussed films of the decade. The role went to Sue Lyon, who was 16 at the time. Years later, when asked about that decision, Hayley Mills said 4 words: "I wish I had done it." Not a complaint, not a speech, 4 words that contain everything. The clarity of someone who knows exactly what was taken from them and has lived long enough to say it plainly. The girl nobody saw. There is a specific kind of pressure that comes with being loved for something that is real, but incomplete. The Pollyanna warmth was genuine. The charm in The Parent Trap was not manufactured. Hayley Mills actually had those qualities. But she also had other things: artistic ambition, a growing skepticism, a restlessness that had nowhere to go inside the Disney framework. And those things, real as they were, did not fit the product. In her memoir, Forever Young, she wrote about those years at the peak of her Disney fame with language nobody expected: low self-esteem, eating habits falling apart, a constant sense of restriction, of roles and possibilities being steadily narrowed while the world outside was widening. None of this appeared in the press releases. None of it showed in the photographs. The smile in every photograph was real. That is exactly the problem with that kind of performance. It is real enough to convince even the person performing it, for a while. The person who stands on a stage to receive the last Juvenile Oscar in history, who has been on the cover of magazines on 2 continents, who is described in newspaper profiles as America's favorite child star, even though she is British. That person is not suffering in any dramatic, visible way. But she is carrying something. She is carrying the weight of being required at every moment to be a specific, stable, unchanging version of herself. The weight of a world that has decided who you are and needs you to stay that way. That weight does not announce itself. It accumulates quietly. And when it finally becomes too heavy, the person who has been carrying it does not always make the choice the world around them expects. The decision. In 1966, Hayley Mills was 20 years old. Her Disney contract was approaching its expiration. Representatives came to her with new scripts, new projects, the offer to extend. She read the scripts. Then she read the next one. Then the one after that. The same girl in different situations. Charming, uncomplicated, warm, safe. The same character she had been playing for 6 years, wearing slightly different clothes in slightly different locations. She declined to renew. No public statement, no dramatic confrontation, just a refusal to sign, and a chapter closing without ceremony. What nobody told her before she made that decision, what she discovered only afterward, was the bill waiting on the other side. 1 year after she walked away from the Disney contract, a letter arrived from the British Inland Revenue. The tax rate applicable to her Disney earnings, accumulated across all those years of films and merchandise and public appearances, was 90%. 90%. The majority of everything she had earned during the most commercially successful years of her career went to the British government. She filed appeals, multiple times. None succeeded. She was 21 years old. No active contract, no substantial savings, no plan beyond the certainty that she could not continue pretending to be someone she had outgrown. And it was at this precise moment, broke, newly free, standing at the edge of something she could not yet see clearly, that she walked onto the set of a film called The Family Way and met the man who would become the greatest scandal of her life. Roy Bolting. What nobody mentions. Here is what every article about Hayley Mills and Roy Bolting includes. He was 52 years old. He was married. She was 19. There was a 33-year age gap. The relationship was controversial. Here is what almost none of those articles include. Who Roy Bolting actually was. Roy Bolting and his twin brother John Bolting were the most celebrated filmmakers of British social satire in the 1950s and 1960s. Their work was not romantic comedy or adventure films. It was surgical, pointed, frequently brilliant critique of British institutions. Private's Progress in 1956 dismantled the mythology of the wartime military. Brothers-in-Law in 1957 exposed the absurdities of the legal establishment. I'm All Right, Jack in 1959, widely considered one of the finest political comedies in the history of British cinema, spent 2 hours methodically skewering both industrial management and trade unions, leaving no sacred institution standing. The Bolting brothers built their entire careers on one principle: find the comfortable lie that a powerful institution tells about itself and hold it up to the light. Roy Bolting, in other words, spent 30 years professionally destroying exactly the kind of careful, managed, image-controlled systems that had spent 6 years building Hayley Mills into a product. Now hold that thought alongside this. Hayley Mills, who had just walked away from the most sophisticated image management apparatus in the entertainment industry, fell in love with the man whose life's work was exposing how image management apparatuses actually function. This is not coincidence. This is the logic of a person who was done being a product and found herself drawn instinctively towards someone who spoke the language she was just beginning to learn. The press in 1966 and 1967 wrote about the age gap. Nobody wrote about this. The night everything shifted. The Family Way was a 1966 British comedy, directed by Roy Bolting, about a newly married couple who cannot, for reasons the film explores with unexpected frankness, consummate their marriage. It was not a Disney film. It contained a brief scene. It asked of Hayley Mills something that 6 years of Disney had never asked: to be complicated. She said yes. She described filming that scene later with a characteristic mixture of honesty and dry humor. For the first time in my sheltered life, I took all my clothes off for the camera. This was it, my chance to grow up. Taking my clothes off was an extraordinarily awful and rather hysterical experience from start to finish. The evening before The Family Way opened in cinemas across Britain, Roy Bolting took her to a private screening of the finished film. They sat together in the dark. She watched herself on screen. Not Pollyanna, not the twins from The Parent Trap, not any of the 6 girls she had played for Disney. Someone new. Someone she was still in the process of becoming. She said afterward that she could barely pay attention to her own performance. Something else had taken over her attention entirely. After the screening, they walked out into the December night. Through Trafalgar Square, quiet at that hour, the stone lions patient and still in the lamplight. Down the Mall, the long ceremonial avenue that runs toward Buckingham Palace, the plane trees bare on either side, the pavement nearly empty. At a pedestrian crossing near the palace gates, Roy Bolting turned toward her and kissed her. She had not been expecting it, or she had been expecting it so carefully, with such deliberate inattention, that when it happened it felt like both a surprise and the only thing that could possibly have happened next. The evening continued with the film's opening celebration, a reception she described as rapturous, lasting deep into the night. "We slept together," she said years later.
"I adored him. I simply didn't care that he was 32 years older."
3 words carry everything in that sentence. I simply didn't care. Not, I knew it was complicated and chose it anyway. Not, I was swept away and didn't know better. Simply, I didn't care. The statement of someone who has looked at the situation clearly, run whatever calculations are available, and made a decision with full awareness of what they are deciding. And then, in the same week, that specific December week of 1966, the week of the premiere, the week of the walk through London, the week of the kiss, the newspapers carried another headline. Walt Disney was dead. He died on December 15th, 1966. He was 65 years old. Lung cancer. The man who had watched Tiger Bay and decided the girl in it needed to be his star. The man who had built the framework that shaped 6 years of her life. The man whose name on a contract had determined with extraordinary thoroughness what she was and was not permitted to become. Gone. She said she was shocked, and she was. Walt Disney had been a formative influence, a mentor in the fullest sense. Someone who had believed in her before the world knew to believe in her, who had given her a platform that few performers in the history of the medium had ever had at that age. But underneath the shock was something that she did not need to name, because the timing named it for her. The old world was ending in the same week the new one was beginning. The system that had defined her was dissolving at precisely the moment she stepped outside of it. The cage had opened, and its builder had died before he could close it again. She was 20 years old. She was free. And she was in love.
The airport. She didn't tell her parents for months.
The relationship with Roy continued through early 1967 in the way that complicated things continue when you are not yet sure how to explain them, with genuine feeling, with private happiness, and with the awareness that a conversation was approaching that she had not yet found the words for. Her father was in America, producing a television series. Her mother was with him. She decided to meet them at the airport when they flew back. Early morning, Heathrow. The kind of meeting you arrange when what you have to say requires a face and not a telephone. She was waiting when they came through, and before she said a word, they knew. "My parents sensed that something was up the moment they saw me," she said later. When she began explaining about Roy, there was a silence. Then Sir John Mills, a man who had played soldiers and heroes and fathers across 40 years of film, a man who had been knighted by the Queen, a man of considerable composure, sat down on the floor of Heathrow Airport. Her mother looked at her steadily and said, with the particular directness that belongs to women who have seen enough of life to be past performance. "So you've finally been in..." When her father recovered himself, he did not shout, he did not threaten, he did not forbid. He gave her an equation instead. "Darling, I do like Roy. Darling, he's as old as me. When you're 40, Roy will be 72. It was the most loving thing he could have said. Not a judgment, not a command, a number. The honest arithmetic of someone who could see further down the road than she could, and was trying with everything he had to make her see it too. She understood the number. She had already done the calculation herself. She gave her father a joke in return, that when the time came, she would push Roy along the seafront in a wheelchair. Her father stared at her. She described his expression as horrified. Not horrified by the joke, horrified by the smile that came with it. The smile of someone who has decided and knows they have decided, and is done being persuaded of anything. He recognized it. He had probably worn it himself at some point in some version of this same conversation with his own parents. He didn't try to stop her. What he saw in that smile told him it would not work. She left the airport with her decision intact. Sir John Mills had given her the most important number he could. She had acknowledged it, laughed at it, and walked forward anyway. The price, and what she never said. Hayley Mills and Roy Bolting married in 1971. She was 24. He was 57. Roy came to the marriage with history that did not simplify things. 3 previous marriages, 6 sons. 2 of those sons were older than his new wife. They had 1 child together, a son named Crispin, born in 1973, who grew up to become a musician, the frontman of the British rock band Kula Shaker. The public reaction was immediate and harsh. British newspapers were not gentle. Fan responses were sharper. Here was the girl who had been the purest, most carefully protected image in popular entertainment, now married to a man old enough to be her grandfather, a man with a complicated personal history, a man who represented everything that the Disney years had been designed to keep at a distance. The institution was gone, the image was cracked, and a country that had spent years deciding who Hayley Mills was did not take kindly to being told it had only ever known part of the story. They divorced in 1977, 6 years after the wedding. Crispin was 4 years old. What is worth noting, what tends to get lost inside the noise of the scandal narrative, is what Hayley Mills never said about Roy Bolting. Across every interview in the decades since, across her memoir, across every public conversation where the subject arose, she never called it a mistake. Not once. The people who are hurt by something almost always find a way to say so, eventually. The people who learned something, even when what they learned was painful, even when the thing itself did not survive, tend to be quiet in a different way. They don't perform regret. They simply describe what happened and leave the interpretation to someone else. Roy Bolting died in 2001 at 87 years old. When he died, Hayley Mills was 55 and had been divorced from him for 24 years. Her father's arithmetic had been exactly right. When she turned 40, Roy was 72, precisely as calculated. The wheelchair along the seafront was never needed. The reversal. In 1997, Hayley Mills was 51 years old. She met Firdaus Bamji, an actor and writer. He was born in 1966, 20 years younger than her. They have been together ever since. As of today, that is 27 years. Take a moment with that. The girl who at 19 fell in love with a man 33 years her senior became, at 51, the woman who built the longest and most stable relationship of her life with a man 20 years younger than herself. People have a ready-made explanation for young women who choose much older men. Searching for a father figure, lacking confidence, easily influenced. The vocabulary of damage. What do those same people do with the second half of the story? The same woman. 3 decades of additional life experience, a failed marriage, a cancer diagnosis she navigated on her own terms. Every reason in the world to make cautious, conventional choices, and she chose the younger man. And it lasted. Perhaps what Hayley Mills was never looking for was a particular age. Perhaps she was looking for something that has nothing to do with the year someone was born. Something closer to the quality of attention a person brings, the space they make for who you actually are, rather than who they need you to be. She found it first in a man who spent his career dismantling false images. She found it again, and more durably, in a man who had no investment in any version of Hayley Mills, except the one standing in front of him. The age moved in opposite directions. The thing she was looking for stayed the same. The fight. In April of 2008, Hayley Mills was 61 years old. She received a diagnosis of breast cancer. She began chemotherapy. After 3 sessions, she stopped. The side effects were severe. The process was, by her description, more frightening to her than the disease itself. She made the decision to pursue a different approach, a combination of alternative treatments and selective conventional medicine, a path that her medical team did not uniformly endorse. She kept the diagnosis private throughout. She did not discuss it publicly while she was in treatment. She navigated it largely on her own terms, with the people she chose around her. She survived. Years later, she attributed her recovery in part to the unconventional treatment she had chosen. Whether that attribution is medically precise is a question for people more qualified than most of us to answer. What it tells us about the person making it is something else entirely. Here is a woman who, at 61, facing something genuinely threatening to her life, looked at the prescribed path and decided she would find her own way through it. Not out of recklessness, not out of denial, but out of the same quality she had demonstrated at 20, walking away from the Disney contract, and at 19, choosing Roy Bolting. The capacity to look at what the institution, the system, the established authority was offering, and to say clearly, that is not the right path for me. 3 times across her life, at 3 different kinds of crossroads, the same quality showed up. At 20, the Disney contract. At 19, Roy Bolting. At 61, the chemotherapy. Not rebellion for its own sake, not stubbornness, something closer to a clear-eyed insistence on being the person who decides what happens to her own life. The ending. Hayley Mills is 78 years old. She is still working. She is still with Firdaus Bamji. She lives in London, the city where 66 years ago, a 12-year-old girl walked into an audition that was not meant for her and walked out with a role that changed everything. The last Juvenile Oscar in the history of the Academy Awards is somewhere in her possession. A piece of gold that represents the end of a category, the ceiling of a standard, a moment that has not been repeated and will not be. It sits, presumably, alongside the ordinary objects of an ordinary life that has been lived in full. There is a particular kind of fame that arrives before the person inside it has finished becoming themselves. It builds everything from the outside in, the image, the contract, the public expectation, and leaves the interior work to be done later, in private, under pressure, usually without help. The person at the center of it does not necessarily suffer in obvious ways, but they spend years carrying the gap between who they are required to be and who they actually are. Hayley Mills spent the first part of her public life being the world's idea of innocence itself. The last Juvenile Oscar, Pollyanna, the twins, the smile that covered 6 continents and sold merchandise in a dozen languages and never, not once, showed the weight underneath. And then she put it down. Not in a single dramatic moment. Over time, through a series of choices that each cost her something. The contract, the savings, the scandal, the marriage, the public approval. She put down the version of herself that had been built for someone else's purposes, and picked up the work of becoming who she actually was. Her father gave her the arithmetic at Heathrow Airport in 1967. He was right. He is almost always right, in stories like this one. But he was missing one variable that arithmetic cannot account for. The particular kind of knowledge that only comes from having lived through the thing yourself, from having made the choice, paid the price, and discovered, not in theory, but in actual experience, what it cost and what it was worth. Hayley Mills has never claimed to have made only wise choices. She has never presented herself as someone who got everything right. She has simply described what happened, clearly and without apology, and declined to call the things she chose mistakes. That, in its way, is its own kind of answer. The people who built her image chose her because she had a quality they could use. They were not wrong about the quality. They were wrong about who it belonged to. It belonged to her. It always had. The girl they built is the story everyone knows. The woman she chose to be is the one worth telling.